All right, this is your cybersecurity quarterback, Ron Wilkie, going to PCI Fundamentals Part 2. Basically, I've received questions on from merchants on what levels they are and what type of assessments they should do if they have credit card data. So this presentation is dedicated to those of you who are in charge of that for your company, or if you're consulting and someone has asked you the same questions I get asked. So the goals of this presentation are to describe the payment brand, compliance programs, define a level and transaction volume, outline the self-assessment questionnaire and its various types. So I'm going to try and take my time, but also try not to read every slide because you can pause and look at the slides yourself, right? So the payment brand compliance programs, tracking and enforcement. So we talked about what PCI is and the PCI SSC. So what are their responsibilities? They track and enforce their rules. They enforce penalties if you don't abide by security standards and rules, especially if there's a breach. And if there is a breach, they also make sure that the investigations go according to the way they've stated they should go. They validate the process and who needs to be validated. Not all companies need to be validated, as we'll see with the different levels. And also they define the merchant levels and service provider levels. So let's go ahead and get to the next item, payment brand responsibilities. And as I mentioned, they define the rules for forensic investigations. So basically, when there is a data breach or something goes wrong, they monitor and facilitate those investigations, again, because this is their business. And we're talking about companies like American Express, Discover, JCB, MasterCard, and Visa. Those are the payment brands. And they define the rules for forensic investigations in case your company has a data breach and credit card data has been either stolen or the data may have been compromised. All right, so what are these different levels for the merchants? And remember from my last video, I talked about merchant, I talked about acquirers, I talked about the payment brand network, and I talked about issuers. So right now we're talking about merchants. Let's say I have a business and I'm selling widgets. I am a merchant. So what level am I? So let's look at the screen and you can see that you have the different levels for the different payment brands. So for example, a level 1 for American Express means that you do 2.5 million transactions or more. That would be a level 1 for American Express. For American Express, level 2 is 50,000 to 2.5 million. Okay? And you can see on the screen, Discover, 6 million transactions or more would make you a level 1. And level 2, 1 million to 6 million. Same thing for JCB. Same thing for MasterCard and Visa. All right, did you see that? All right, great. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk about level 3s. So for American Express, if you do 50,000 transactions, now we're not talking about dollars, we're talking about the amount of transactions that you do. If you do 50,000 or less, then you are a level 3. They don't have a level 4. Discover, 20,000 to 1 million, and level 4 is less than 20,000. So for Discover, level 3 is 20,000 to 1 million. MasterCard, the same thing. Visa, you see here Visa Europe, they're two distinct entities, but they both have the same standard in that regard. Now, what do you do if you are a level 1? So what does that mean? Okay, I'm a level 1. What does that mean? All right, so that means you need a QSA. I think a Qualified Security Assessor. I think that's what it stands for. Don't hold me to that, right? But you need a QSA to conduct an on-site assessment. That QSA is going to come out, and based on those standards that I mentioned in the last video, they're going to go through and look at your security in your company to make sure you adhere to those standards. Or you can engage an internal audit staff. So if you have an internal audit staff or group, they can do the assessment, but it needs to be signed off by a CEO or a COO. And also that internal staff person should be certified. So you would be a PCI ISA. That person would be a PCI ISA. And there's a test that you have to take. And just to be honest, that's something I may want to do, right? So that's why I'm doing these videos, to help me train myself in order to pass those tests. Okay. MasterCard requires primary internal auditor have attended. Oh, that's what I was just saying. The Council's Internal Security Assessor program and passed the associated exam if the company will not be using a QSA. I suggest you use a QSA, but it could be less expensive if you have an ISA in-house. All right, so if you're a level 2, what do? You can use a self-assessment questionnaire, or SAQ. That's something we will talk about. That was one of our goals for this presentation, is to talk about the different SAQs. SAQ stands for self-assessment questionnaire, but in the industry it's called a SAQ. So someone may say, you need to do a SAQ, or where is your SAQ, or did you do a SAQ? That's what they're talking about, a self-assessment questionnaire. All right. So both level 1 and level 2 merchants must include quarterly internal scan results performed by an ASV. So an ASV is it scans for an automatic vulnerability scanner, right? And so what happens is you run this scan. You may run it weekly, you may run it daily, depending on your company, but you must have one that you run every quarter, and it should be clean. Basically, the particular vulnerabilities don't exist, and if they do exist, they need to be remediated, but you have to have a quarterly scan every quarter. You can't, have one in the first quarter and miss the second quarter and have one in the third. You have to have one every quarter. American Express strongly recommends completion of an SAQ and quarterly ASV scans for level 3 merchants. Let's see, same thing for Discover, right? For level 3 and level 4. Now also, this says that the acquirer can be the entity that determines whether or not an SAQ needs to be performed. So we'll talk about what acquirers do and what their responsibility is in this regard in a couple of slides. So MasterCard requires level 3 merchants to provide an SAQ and quarterly network scan. So you'll see this theme continue to happen. They want an SAQ if you aren't a level 1, and you have to have that ASV scan, excuse me. All right, so now you've done your scans, you have done an assessment, whether you had a QSA or you use your internal audit staff to do it. So now what do you do with that? So you have to report that information to the different entities, American Express, Visa, Discover, MasterCard, right? So what do you give them? So there is the attestation of compliance, the AOC. There's a ROC too, record of compliance. But you're not going to give them the record of compliance, because that's all of your information, unless there's a need for you to do that. But primarily, you're going to send out your attestation of compliance, your AOC. Now, if you're not compliant, you do this self-assessment, or you have a QSA do an assessment, and you're not compliant, then you need to complete part 4 of the AOC, action plan for remediation. And that remediation needs to take place within 12 months, by the way. Same thing for Discover and MasterCard. So the acquirers report the compliance of the MasterCard merchants quarterly. So if I'm a merchant and I've hired an acquirer to make sure all of my transactions go through, to contact the payment brand network, to find the bank, which is the issuer, and process all of that information and make sure that I can actually give the item to the card holder who purchased my widget. If I'm using an acquirer, the acquirer report the compliance of the for MasterCard merchants quarterly. I hope that made sense. I kind of talked around some other things, but kind of going back to my first presentation just as a reminder, but I hope you got that. If not, just send me a message. All right, this is a lot to read, so you can read it at your own leisure. Level 2 merchants includes the SAQ as well as the attestation of compliance for the SAQ. So basically, same thing I just mentioned, if you're a level 2, you will do a SAQ, and you're going to report the AOC. For American Express merchants, this is what you're going to do. Same thing for level 2 Discover merchants. Let me see if there's anything different in here. So same thing with the acquirer. Okay. All right, so you can read that and take note of that. American Express does not require level 3 merchants to submit validation documentation. So you can do a self-assessment questionnaire. You don't have to submit it though if you're a level 3. That means you do less than 50,000 transactions a year. Discover 3 merchants that are compliant must complete an attestation of compliance. So that's a little bit different from American Express. And this should be a capital E here. Sorry about that. Hold on. I'm editing as I create my presentation. I'm talking through it as well. Thank you all for participating in this with me. This is how I get better. Your questions help me get better. And it completes my range of knowledge for the different topics of security. So anyway, discover level 3 merchants that are compliant must complete an attestation of compliance from the applicable SAQ. So you still have to submit the AOC. And if you aren't compliant, you have to complete that part 4 again of the AOC for remediation. Now let's talk about acquirers. For Visa Inc., acquirers must report at least twice a year the compliance status for all of their level 1, 2, and 3 merchants. So if you are an acquirer, you must report at least twice a year the compliance status. Okay, so that's different than a merchant, but that's what you need to do if you are an acquirer. These are the types of documentation that you should provide. You should provide the annual on-site PCI data security assessment, or the SAQ, quarterly network scans, we talked about both of these things, and a summary of compliance for service providers. A summary of compliance for service providers and merchants of the acquirer. We talked about service providers in the last presentation, so I'm just building from the first presentation to this presentation, and we're going to continue. Like I said, I think I'm doing 15 presentations total. Maybe one every 2 or 3 days, maybe one a week. All right, so the different types of SAQs. Right, you got SAQ A, SAQ B, SAQ C, SAQ BIP, SAQ CVT, SAQ D. So let's talk about some of these SAQs, these self-assessment questionnaires. SAQ A is intended for merchants that accept only card not present transactions. That is e-commerce, mail order, telephone order. So basically, if you're online, or you know how you're looking at, what's the name of that television channel, QSV, I can't remember, but you know, where you're buying stuff on television and you call in, say, hey, I'd like to order product number 9831. They say, what's your credit card number? They have to fill out a SAQ A if they are if they're level 2 or 3 for American Express, right? And this applies directly to them, or MasterCard, Visa, Discover. So if they have to do a SAQ and they are doing mail order or telephone or card not present, so you may even go to the store. I went to the store once and I didn't have my card. Actually, I didn't have my whole wallet, and I was like, oh man, I don't have my wallet. I don't have my, can you just take my credit card number? Because I know it by heart. The guy looked at me like I was crazy. He was like, you know your credit card? I was like, yeah, I know my credit card number by heart. So that would be, and he didn't want to do it, but I said, you can do a card not present, sir. Look, I know this. I work in the industry. Let's make this happen. Then he said, well, I'm going to have to talk to my boss, and I don't know how to do that. I said, okay, never mind. I have my phone. And I just swiped it over the phone. Everything was good. So that's a good use of technology, but there are inherent vulnerabilities with that too, but that's another video for another day. Sorry, I digress. All right, let's go on to the next one. Oh yeah, I started editing the presentation. SAQ B is for those merchants who process cardholder data using only imprint machines or using only dial-out terminals. So, for instance, there are terminals that you connect to a telephone line and it goes, remember that old system, and it goes, this is for them. And also, do you remember back in the day where you go, shoo, 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 shoo? That, those are imprint machines. So SAQ B are for those merchants who process cardholder data using only imprint machines or using dial-out terminals. That word dial-out is very important. SAQ C, merchants who dedicate payment with dedicated payment application systems. So the key term there, payment applications systems. And if they're segmented from other systems, we talked about segmentation a little bit in the last presentation. I'll talk about it more when we talk about firewalls with standard 1. And connected to the internet for transaction of credit card data. So if you're using a payment application system and it's segmented from the rest of your network, this is for you, SAC-C. You know what? And I was supposed to talk about SAC-VT, virtual terminals. Maybe I'll put it in here. I hope I did. Maybe I didn't. If not, look for an updated version later on. All right, SAC P2PE, peer-to-peer. That's what P2P basically stands for. It's for merchants using a validated P2P solution that is listed on the PCI SSC website. So we talked about the PCI SSC, Security Standards Council for PCI. So the only way that you can do this is important. I got it right here. Important. To be eligible for any of these SACs we just mentioned, a merchant must not have any electronic storage of cardholder data. So you're not storing this in a file somewhere on your network or on your computer. You can't do that. And if you are doing that, a SAC does not relate to your security standard practice. All right, let's go to the next one. So let's look at SAC-B IP. So remember, SAC-B is for imprint. So that IP kind of like, you would think it means, oh, that's like imprint. But IP, Internet Protocol, you know, IP addresses. So think imprint and IP addresses together. Has been developed for merchants who process cardholder data only via standalone PTS approved point of interaction devices that have an IP connection to the payment processor. So you're going from the merchant to the payment processor. And we talked about that loop of the payment brand network and all of that. So that relates to the SAQ, the SAC-B, the SAC-B IP. All right. To be eligible for the SAC-B IP, the payment terminal must be listed on the PCI SSC website as an approved device. All right. So they have devices that have already been vetted. And if you're using one of those devices, then you can use this SAC-B IP. And that's it. That's all I got. So as I mentioned, SAC-CVT, I don't have in here, but I will add and talk about it maybe in the next video. We've been going for 17 minutes now, almost 18. I hope you liked it. Send me any emails or respond to this video, any questions that you may have. And thank you for watching.